Hello, loves! Welcome to Orchid's Odysseys, and this will be Red by MidnighttWriter. Please make sure to check out the author in the description, and I hope you enjoy! Summary. Red. That's all there was. Dark crimson red spilled all over her fingers. Hot, thick red. Seeped into her pores as it stained every inch of skin it touched. It spilled into the ground, into cracks in the pavement. The dust mixed with the red until it became a thick sludge. Red. That's all there was. Dark crimson red spilled over her fingers. Hot, thick red seeped into her pores as it stained every inch of skin it touched. It spilled onto the ground, into the cracks of the pavement. The dust mixed with the red and became a thick sludge. A hand reached up to her face and pushed back the dark lock of hair that had fallen in front of her face. The hand, no, her hand, smeared the red along her cheek as it dropped back towards the ground. She launched herself away from the red, away from the pain. Her back collided with a stone wall behind her, painfully, as she pulled her knees up to her chest and curled in on herself. From just over the top of her knees, she could see him. Red bubbled out from his lips as he gasped for air. A rough, choking noise as his hand reached out towards her. She flinched in on herself as his red-covered hand, collapsed to the ground. The other still clutching around her throat as the red spilled between his fingertips. His eyes glazed over as he slumped onto the ground. The hand fell away and revealed a large hole that had been gouged out, and several tendons showed through the unnatural gap, the gap she had made. Her grip lessened, her tight, locked grip around the blade. Both handle and sharp tip both bathed in red. It clattered to the ground as she gasped for air. Her eyes did not leave the man for a second. Her ears still filled with his shriek, his pained breath, his last moment, filled with the utmost agony she had caused. Her skin still stung from his touch. Each breath was labored and rough from the fingers that wrapped around her throat. Stung from the nails that dug into her soft skin. Faintly, she could hear someone yell. Their voice seemed miles away. A louder shook over her ears and through her body. Her hands crept up to her face before they clasped over her ears. The voice became louder and louder as she curled in on herself, eyes still fixated on the man, the body before her. Then, something shifted into view. Someone in front of her. The man out of sight, the voice continued to speak, the words muffled and incomprehensible, yet comforting. She blinked repeatedly in an attempt to rid the red from her sight. The fog that had muffled her senses lifted slightly as she focused on the person, the girl in front of her. The red replaced with purple. Yaoyorozu Momo! Jirou? She whispered. The question turned into a statement as her voice cracked from desperation. Yeah, it's me. Jirou attempted a reassuring smile, but the concern showed through it. Can I touch you? Yaoyorozu paused for a moment before she nodded hesitantly. Jirou shifted forward slightly, her motion slow as she raised her hand in front of her. Carefully, she reached out and wrapped her finger around Yaoyorozu's. Gently, she pried them off her ears and pulled them in front of her. Fingers intertwined as Yaoyorozu looked down at them numbly. I made them red, she said blankly, as she stared at the red that covered her fingers, now splotched across Jirou's as well. It's okay, really. Jirou paused as she looked over her shoulder at the bloodied body of the man who lay only feet away. Kaminari went to get Aizawa. He'll be here soon. As soon as the words left her mouth, another set of footsteps pounded towards them. Yaoyorozu looked up numbly as Aizawa rounded the corner, his capture scarf lifted off his shoulders from his activated quirk. He quickly came to a stop as he scanned the scene before him. "What happened?" he said sternly, as Yaoyorozu looked over at the man. Drops of rain trickled down her cheeks. No, not rain. Tears. They mixed with the red smeared on her face. It It's not what it looks like. No, he... She trailed off slightly as she blinked slowly in an attempt to get rid of the glaze that had covered her vision. "I know," Aizawa said, the tone softer than she had ever heard. "Jirou, help her up and give her your jacket." "Can you move?" Jirou asked quietly as Yaoyorozu nodded slowly. Carefully, Jirou shifted over to her side and pulled the other girl's arm around her shoulder. Yaoyorozu pushed herself off the ground with her free hand, her back against the wall for support. Her legs shook slightly under the weight as Jirou brushed the tears away. "Hold on." She stood Yaoyorozu up before she pulled her arm away and slipped her arm out of the jacket sleeve. Before she returned her arm to the other girl's side, the jacket wasn't large enough to wrap around her, and instead hung off her shoulders before she clung to it like a lifeline. Yaoyorozu didn't remember how she had got back to the dorms. It was a blur. Blur of voices, concerned, worried, loud. A car. She knew for a fact there was a car. Black leather seats that felt cool underneath her fingers. But one thing she knew for sure was Jirou. The girl stayed by her side throughout it all, her fingers locked around hers. When they entered the car and stayed until they reached the dorms and up to her room, Jirou helped her across her room and into the small bathrooms. "I'll be back with a change of clothes." Yaoyorozu nodded as she looked around the pristine white bathroom. The white countertop had a streak of red along the side. She took a deep breath before she stood and walked over to the sink. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her hair had been yanked out of the band that held it in the back. She could still feel the tingly sensation of pain along her scalp. It hung in dark clumps, the red used as an adhesive to hold them together. The sides of her face, up to her ears, were dyed red from the desperate attempt to quiet the sounds around her. Her tears were red. Her eyes were red, a puffy sort of red that rimmed her eyes from the tears she barely felt. The once soft, cream-colored sweater that she had been wearing hardened into a firm, dark red. Then she saw her hands. Saw them not through the glazed-over look from before. From a brain filled with fog and static. And dried on her skin, hidden in every wrinkle around the knuckles, hidden underneath her fingernails, was red. Only red. Frantically, she snapped the handle of the sink to the side as the water began to rush out. Red. That's all she could see. Water, soap, rinse. Frantic fingernails scraped across her skin as the basin filled with colored water. Red spilled all over the counter. The hot water burned as it touched her hands, but she paid no mind to it. Long fingernails embedded it into her skin and flaked the skin away layer by layer. The skin peeled off in small little rolls of flesh. A loud sob caught in her throat as her eyes brimmed with tears again. They spilled down her face, hot and thick, like the water that had burned more with each cut she had dug into her hands. Firm hands wrapped around her wrists and pulled them away from the water. She trembled slightly as one of the hands released her wrist and turned the water off. "Aizawa-sensei?" she whispered as the older man nodded. He led her over to the toilet and put the seat down before he gestured for her to sit. Slowly, she sat down as he walked back to the door to retrieve a small medical bag and the cloth before he ran the cloth under the sink water and wrung it out. "Jirou told me what happened," Aizawa said as he kneeled down behind her and began to rub the cloth against her forehead. The rough fabric scraped across her face, with little droplets of water squeezed down her face. "What did she tell you?" "That during the outing, you went missing. Jirou looked back to where you were, but you weren't there. They split up in pairs and went to go find you. Kaminari and her heard the struggle from the alleyway between the two of the shops. That's where she found you." I think he wanted money. I do not remember. She paused for a moment as Aizawa shifted the cloth away from the new blood-soaked corner. I am sorry. Why? Oh, sorry. Uh, I'm sorry. Why? You trained me better, and when I needed it, I panicked. That was not your fault. Do you understand me? He paused as he caught her in the eyes before she looked away. Her face burned hot with a fiery red shame. It was my knife. He had his hands around my throat, and I was frantic. I didn't know what to do, she explained frantically as Aizawa walked over to the sink to run a fresh towel under the water. And you did what you had to do, because of that, you're alive. She nodded silently as Aizawa began to rub away the red on her face once more. A tense, thick silence fell between them. An unspoken question settled on the tip of her tongue that she choked out most of the air she had attempted to take in. Are you going to expel me? No, Aizawa stated firmly, without a second thought, as if he knew the question would eventually resurface. You attacked and defended yourself. However, we will be training outside of school hours to improve self-defense and reactions. But that is not a punishment. He paused as he pulled the cloth away and examined her face for a moment before a satisfied nod. Can you get the blood out of your hair, or do you need help? I... She began as her hand reached up to touch her hardened and matted strand of hair. I do not know. I'm sorry. I can get Midnight if you would be more comfortable. No! Red flushed her face once more as she looked to the ground, ashamed of her interruption. Aizawa nodded as he stood and turned around the water in the shower. She knew it made no sense. She knew there was little logic behind it. But every part of her wanted Aizawa to stay, as if he could protect her from the man, even though he knew he would never come back. He was there at the USJ attack, there at the summer camp. He was there when she woke up in the hospital, disoriented and scared. And he was there now. It's all right. You can stay. Take the jacket off and kneel with your head in the shower. Steam began to come off the shower spray, and he stuck his hand under it for a moment before turning it slightly to the right. Slowly, she kneeled on the ground. The tide was cold as she leaned over, her head and shoulders in the shower. Next, Aizawa pulled his shower head off its holder before he knelt next to her and held her hair in his other hand. With practiced ease, he went clump by clump. The water hid it as he gently massaged the hardened red and that had long dried into a thick rusted brown. She could feel the water seeped into the shirt fabric over his shoulders, but she paid no mind to it. Eventually, after each section had been dealt with, he stood and placed the shower head back into the holder, her senses filled with the soft aroma of roses as he damped a liberal amount of shampoo into his hand and slowly worked it through the top of her hair, to the tips of her hair. He turned her head back under the spray and began to work out the soft, bubbly foam out of her hair. She peeked an eye open, but she squeezed them tight again as she saw pink-stained water and the foam. Once content, he had gotten it all out, he repeated the process with conditioner. I'm going to explain to Naze what happened. You are not in trouble, he added quickly as she looked at him with panic. I just need to inform him of the situation. He'll understand. Now, you should go take a shower to get all the blood off. I... She started before she trailed off and looked away in shame. I do not want to be alone. Aizawa nodded, with a slightly amused look on his face. I'm not sure Jirou would let you. She's at your desk currently. I couldn't get her to leave. She stood under the hot water until she was sure the red was all gone. The hot water stung slightly as she scrubbed the red away, but not as bad as before. When she finally got out and dried off, she looked over at the pile of red, wet, stained clothes that lay on the floor. "Jirou?" She called out hesitantly. Instantly, she heard the creaking of the bed as the girl rushed over. "Need clothes?" she asked, her voice slightly muffled by the door. "Yes, please." "I'm opening the door just a crack to slip them through. Not looking." A small smile crept over her face at Jirou's word. After a late-night conversation where she had vented about her problems after being sexualized and objectified by others, Jirou had started going out of her way to make her comfortable. She had never done anything to make her uncomfortable, but after Jirou had started verbalizing what she would do before she did it, things like some physical touch, something that made her uncomfortable after all the things she had gone through, things that she thought would stop after going to UA. But if anything got any worse, it had gotten worse. The door cracked open, and she grabbed the soft and fuzzy pants along with the sweatshirt that she thinks used to be Sarah's. They had lost track of whose clothes belonged to who. Figured it was a comfy day, not a silky one. "Thank you." Jirou closed the door, and Yaoyorozu began to change into the clothes. She got a glimpse of herself in the mirror. With the red gone, she could see the dark, purple bruises around her neck from his tight grip. She ran her hand over them hesitantly. With the adrenaline gone, she could feel the effects. Her throat ached a bit every time she had tried to move her head, and when she swallowed, the cold air hit her instantly as she opened the door. Sorry. The cold air hit her instantly as she opened the door. The room was frigid compared to the hot, steam-filled bathroom. Jirou turned towards her from the empty seat at her desk. Textbooks around her, but her journal for notes was empty. "Hey, how are you doing?" Jirou asked hesitantly as she got up from her chair and crossed the room towards her. Her jaw clenched slightly, like it was always did when she was nervous. Yaoyorozu paused for a moment, unsure of what to say. "My hair is tangled," she said finally, as Jirou exhaled a sigh and a slightly weak laugh. "Do you want me to brush it for you?" Yaoyorozu froze for a moment as she took in the question. Her heart pounded in her chest, her throat tightened slightly. But not from the bruises. No, it tightened in a way that it always seemed to when she was around Jirou. It never happened around anyone else, and she wasn't entirely sure what to make of it. She didn't know if she liked it or hated it. Jirou looked towards the ground in shame as she twirled her long earlobes with her fingers. "I'm sorry, that was weird." "No! No!" Yaoyorozu interrupted before she paused and started again. I mean, I would like that." Jirou smiled as she headed into the bathroom as Yaoyorozu sat along the bed and pulled her legs close up against her side. Her hands gripped the satin blanket. Even though the adrenaline had faded, the anxiety hadn't, only leaving her exhausted but still on edge. Jirou crawled onto the bed behind her, on her knees to be able to reach the taller girl's hair. At first, Yaoyorozu had been embarrassed by the size of her bed, but once the other girls realized that all of them could fit onto it, it had become the go-to meeting place. "Hold still, and, tell me if I'm hurting you or anything." Yaoyorozu nodded as Jirou inspected her hair for a moment before she started to pull it on it in sections. Her fingers gently worked through the thick knots, carefully as not to rip the strands, before she used a large clip to hold them in place against her head. "This is going to take a little while." "That bad?" From the blood. From the blood." Jirou hesitated awkwardly before she continued. "And The fight, it's just a little, not great in some sections. She pulled away as she scrolled for a moment before a soft song played from her phone. Yaoyorozu knew the calm lyrical song. Wasn't what she usually listened to, but that what she played the song for her. For her. Slowly, she began to work through the knots, strand by strand, bunch by bunch. Hesitant at first, but as time went on and settled into a steady pace, as she sung softly under her breath along to the music. Soft enough that Yaoyorozu nearly couldn't hear her, but she didn't want to mention it for fear the other girl would get too embarrassed and stop. Her shoulders slumped at the tension, and she held her shoulders in a dissipated and deep, heavy exhaustion overtook it. "Thank you," she whispered. "Anytime." And that was read by MidnighttWriter. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you, MidnighttWriter, for letting me podfic this. I'm a little in shock because last time I checked, I had around like 38 subscribers. That was already like a big dopamine hit for my heart, I guess. And then the next day, I opened my computer and I ended up having like 68 new subscribers, and I was like, wow. So thank you, everybody. Yeah. Uh, in case you're wondering, yes, I have talked a lot today. My voice is kind of sore. And thank you for listening. Sorry for this small ramble. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you'll return next time. Bye.